She was just a waitress. He was the most dangerous man in America. And on a hail-stormy December night, fate threw them together, not gently, but like two bullets colliding in midair. He offered her $50,000 to pretend to be his lover for one night. She laughed straight in his face. Then he revealed he knew everything about her. Every debt, every sleep deprivation, every secret she hadn't told anyone. It wasn't an invitation. It was a declaration of war. And she, for reasons she only understood at the end of the story, said yes. This is the story of Sienna Hart and Adrian Blackwell. The most brutal love story you'll ever hear. Like and leave a comment with the city you're watching in. I want to know how far this story has come. And don't go anywhere, because from this moment on, things will never be as you imagine. The coffee machine had been broken for 3 weeks. Sienna Hart knew this the way she knew everything else about the Lakeview Diner. Not because anyone told her, but because she was the one who had to explain it to every single customer who came in after midnight and still expected a fresh pot. She'd gotten good at it. The apology, the pivot, the offer of the decaf that nobody ever wanted. Smile, deflect, move on. She was good at surviving small indignities. She'd had a lot of practice. It was 2:13 in the morning on a Thursday in December, and the freezing rain had been coming down sideways for the better part of an hour. The highway outside had gone almost completely silent. A semi-truck every 20 minutes, maybe, its lights cutting through the wet dark like a bad idea. The diner's neon sign buzzed and flickered the way it always did in cold weather, throwing pink light across the parking lot in uneven pulses. Inside, the heating unit ticked and groaned. The vinyl seats along the far wall had been repaired with mismatched electrical tape. The overhead fluorescence over booth 7 had been half dead for so long that the customers who sat there looked slightly gray, like photographs of themselves. Sienna was wiping down the counter for the 5th time. Not because it needed it, because her hands needed something to do. There were 2 other customers in the place. A long-haul driver in his 50s named Darnell, who came through every 3rd Thursday and always ordered the same thing: eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee, and a slice of the pie that was 2 days past good, but that he never complained about. He was reading something on his phone with the careful concentration of a man who'd learned to take his quiet moments seriously. Across the room, a college girl had fallen asleep against the window with her jacket pulled up to her chin. A textbook splayed open on the table in front of her like a small surrender. The door opened. Not the way doors usually opened at 2 a.m., that tentative, apologetic push of someone half embarrassed to need something at this hour. This was different. This was 3 men walking through like the weather had simply agreed to inconvenience itself and move out of their way. Sienna looked up. The first 2 were flanking the 3rd, which told her something immediately. She'd grown up around men who needed to arrange themselves in space in ways that communicated threat before they'd said a single word. And she recognized the formation the way you recognize an old smell. Immediately, in the back of the throat, with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with thought. The 2 on the outside were built for exactly the purpose they appeared to serve. One was broad across the shoulders with a neck like a concrete post and eyes that moved constantly, cataloging exits and sightlines with professional boredom. The other was younger, leaner, with a scar along his jaw that he'd clearly stopped trying to explain. Neither of them sat down. Neither of them looked at the menu board. The man in the middle sat down at the counter. He was tall. She could see that, even seated, the way his frame carried itself with a kind of coiled economy. Nothing wasted, nothing loose. His coat was charcoal wool, expensive, the kind of cut that didn't exist in thrift stores or outlet malls. His shirt beneath it was white, perfectly white, which at 2 in the morning, after a 40-minute drive through freezing rain, was its own kind of statement. His hair was dark, a little damp at the temples. His hands, when he set them flat on the counter, were clean and still. He looked up at her. His eyes were the problem. Sienna had served thousands of people across 7 years of shift work. She'd developed the ability to categorize them quickly. The sad ones, the drunk ones, the lonely ones performing loneliness, the angry ones who'd bring it out eventually, and always did. She could read a table in 10 seconds and know exactly what kind of night she was in for. This man she could not read. His face was perfectly composed. Not pleasant, that wasn't the word. More like a painting of a face, every feature arranged in a way that revealed nothing whatsoever. And yet the eyes themselves held something she couldn't name. Not cruelty, not coldness. Something worse than both of those things. Something that looked like a man who had been awake for a very long time and had stopped expecting sleep to fix it. "Coffee," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. "Black." Sienna reached for a mug. "Machine's been broken for 3 weeks," she said, because she always said it, because that was the job. "I've got drip or I've got decaf, and if you order the decaf, I'll think less of you." Something moved across his face. Not a smile, not quite, but the suggestion that somewhere behind all that careful nothing, a smile existed. "Drip is fine." She poured it, set it in front of him. He wrapped one hand around the mug and looked down at the coffee, the way a person looks at something they need but can't quite trust. The two men by the door hadn't moved. Darnell, at his booth, had looked up once and then very deliberately looked back down at his phone. The college girl slept on. Sienna started to move away. There were napkin dispensers to refill. There was always something. "Sienna Hart." She stopped. He hadn't raised his voice. He'd said her name the same way he'd ordered coffee. Flat, certain, like stating a fact about the weather. She turned back slowly, set her jaw. "You reading that off my name tag?" "Your name tag says Sienna." He looked up at her then, fully, and the steadiness of it was almost physical. "The Hart is from your lease agreement on the apartment at 4C Delmore Street, the one that's $1,100 a month and currently 2 months behind." The diner felt smaller all of a sudden. Sienna put both hands flat on the counter. She was aware of her heartbeat in a way she didn't want to be. "I don't know who you are," she said carefully, "but I'm going to need you to walk me through how that's any of your business." "It isn't," he agreed. "Not yet." "Not ever." He lifted the coffee mug and took a slow sip. Set it down. "Your car is a 2009 Honda Civic. The transmission has been failing for approximately 4 months. You've been parking it on a slight incline to help it catch in the cold. Tuesday mornings, you take a rideshare to a second job at a medical billing company downtown. You've been telling people here you work part-time at a daycare because the billing job pays better and you don't want anyone asking questions about the money." Sienna did not move. She was very good at not moving when she needed to be. "You have $11,000 in credit card debt distributed across 3 cards, a student loan in deferment that stopped being in good standing about 14 months ago, and a brother in Pittsburgh who you send $300 to every month and never talk about." The fluorescent above booth 7 flickered. Outside, the rain came harder. "Here's what I want to know," Sienna said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, and she was grateful for that. "Did you come in here at 2 in the morning to read me my own worst hits, or is there a point?" "There's a point." "Then get to it." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and set something on the counter between them. A card. Heavy stock, cream-colored. Nothing printed on it, just a number written in careful, even handwriting. "My name is Adrian Blackwell," he said. "I need a woman to accompany me to a private event this Saturday. It's a family gathering, 1 evening. You'll be introduced as my girlfriend of 3 months. There will be people there who will try to test you, discomfort you, or ask questions designed to catch you off guard. I need someone who won't flinch." He paused. "You haven't flinched yet." Sienna looked at the card, looked at him. "You're asking me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" "Yes, for a family dinner, among other things. And you walked into a diner at 2 in the morning and picked me specifically because I needed someone who doesn't perform calm, someone who actually has it." Something shifted behind his eyes. "You've been working this counter for 6 hours on 4 hours of sleep. 2 customers have been rude to you in the last hour alone. You haven't raised your voice once. You haven't apologized when you didn't need to. You haven't smiled when you didn't mean it." He looked at her steadily. "I don't need an actress. I've had actresses. They fall apart the moment someone important decides to be unkind." Sienna laughed. It surprised him. She could see that, a small fracture in the composure, quickly smoothed over. "I'm sorry," she said, not sorry at all. "But you realize what you just described sounds insane, right? You walk into my diner, you recite my personal financial history back to me like it's a party trick, and then you offer me what? How much exactly?" $50,000. The number landed in the room like something physical. Sienna was aware of Darnell very carefully, not looking at them. She was aware of her own breathing. "For one night," she said. "For one night." She looked at the card on the counter, at his hands beside it, still and patient. At the two men by the door who had not moved an inch and who she was becoming increasingly certain were carrying weapons under their coats. "And if I say no," she asked, "then I finish this coffee and I leave," Adrian Blackwell said simply. "And you go back to parking your car on a hill and sending your brother $300 a month and hoping the lease office gives you another extension." The coffee machine ticked. The neon outside pulsed. Sienna picked up the card. She didn't say yes. Not yet. She turned the card over in her fingers and looked at the number on it and thought about $11,000 of debt and a car that was dying by degrees and a brother who never asked for anything except the money she sent him without explanation. "Saturday," she said. "I'll send a car at 7. "If you send a car without calling first, I'll assume I'm being kidnapped and act accordingly." The suggestion of a smile again. More definite this time. "I'll call first. And I need to know where we're going. An address, a real one." "I'll send it. And I'm not wearing anything I don't own." He looked at her for a moment. Something passed through his expression that she couldn't quite name, not quite assessment, not quite something else. "I'll arrange for appropriate clothing to be delivered to you Friday morning." "I said I'm not wearing anything I don't—" "You'll own it," he said. "It'll be a gift. You can burn it afterward if you prefer." Sienna set the card down on the counter and looked at this man, this immaculate, impossible man who smelled like cold air and expensive things and something underneath that, something darker, and she made herself ask the question she'd been circling since he sat down. "What kind of family is it?" she said. "The Gathering." He held her gaze, the kind where appearances matter more than almost anything else. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He left $40 on the counter for a $3 cup of drip coffee. He picked up his coat, buttoned it with unhurried precision, and walked toward the door. His two men fell in flanking him without being asked, without a word exchanged. The movement was practiced and quiet, and it made Sienna's skin prickle in a way she didn't like. At the door he stopped, didn't turn around. "Miss Hart." "What?" "The $1,100, the 2 months you're behind." He pushed open the door, and the cold air came in like a blade. "You'll have it by morning." Then he walked out into the rain, and his men went with him, and the door swung shut behind them, and the diner returned to its buzzing, flickering silence. Darnell looked up from his phone, looked at Sienna. "Friend of yours?" he said. "No," Sienna said. She looked down at the card in her hand. The number written in that careful, even script. She thought, "I should throw this away." She put it in her apron pocket instead. She didn't sleep. She got home at 4:30, changed out of her uniform in the cold of her apartment, and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a long time. The radiator knocked. The window let in a thin draft from the bottom that she'd been meaning to weather strip for 2 months. The pile of envelopes on her kitchen table, the ones she'd stopped opening, sat there in the peripheral dark like a quiet accusation. $50,000. She turned it over and over in her head the way you turn a problem when you already know the answer, but don't want to admit it yet. 50,000 was 11,000 in credit card debt, and a transmission, and 4 months of rent and money for her brother, and still enough left over to breathe for the first time in what felt like years. 50,000 was the particular arithmetic of desperation, the kind that makes things seem reasonable that shouldn't. She told herself she was thinking about it logically. She was not thinking about it logically. She was thinking about how he'd said her name. Not like he was trying it out, like he'd known it long enough that it had weight. She was thinking about the two men by the door and what that meant about who this person actually was in the world. She was thinking about the blood she'd thought she saw, or maybe imagined she'd seen, on the edge of one white cuff when he'd reached for the coffee mug. A small thing, maybe nothing. Adrian Blackwell. She ran the name through her head. It didn't land anywhere familiar, which was its own kind of answer. At 6:30 in the morning, she looked up the name online. The search returned almost nothing immediately useful. A few references to a company called Blackwell Holdings, LLC, a brief mention in a financial newsletter from 4 years ago about private real estate transactions, a single photograph from what appeared to be a charity gala, grainy and taken from distance. In the photograph, a man stood at the edge of the frame, partially turned away, tall in a dark suit. She couldn't be certain it was him. She kept looking. It took her 20 minutes to find the piece she'd been half expecting. Not news. Not the kind of thing that ends up in news. More like the spaces around news. The forum posts, the archived local crime reports, the things that people whispered in the comment sections of articles about federal investigations into organized crime. The Blackwell family. 3 generations of it. A name that came up in financial fraud investigations and vanished again. A name attached to properties across 6 states. A name that people online discussed in the careful, hedged language of people who know they might be wrong but suspect they are not. Sienna sat with her phone in her hands for a long time. Then she looked at the envelope on her kitchen table, the one from the lease office, the one she'd been opening and closing for 2 weeks because what was inside it hadn't changed and wasn't going to change. She thought about her brother. She thought about what it cost to keep surviving on the margins of things. Then she got up, put the coffee on, and did not throw away the card. The dress arrived Friday morning. A delivery driver knocked at 8 a.m. and handed her a garment bag with the careful neutrality of someone delivering something expensive and knowing it. There was no note, no receipt, just the bag. She hung it on the back of her closet door and didn't open it until that evening. When she did, she stood in front of it for a long moment. It was navy blue, simply cut, nothing theatrical, nothing that announced itself too loudly. The fabric was something she didn't have a name for, something that held its shape like a decision. She took it off the hanger and held it against herself and looked in the bathroom mirror. She looked for a moment like a version of herself she'd never been given the budget to be. She hung it back up. He called at 9. The phone rang once and she picked it up because she'd been half waiting for it, which she didn't particularly enjoy knowing about herself. Ms. Hart. Same voice, same unhurried certainty, like he'd simply stepped out of the diner and back into her phone. "The dress fits," she said, before he could lead with something that would put her on the back foot. "I know." "How do you know? You don't know my—" She stopped. "You know my measurements. I had them from the medical billing company's HR file. They require them for company uniform ordering." A beat. "I apologize for the method." "Do you, though?" "No," he said, after a moment. "Not especially." She almost laughed again. She didn't let herself. "Where are we going tomorrow?" He gave her an address outside the city, a town she'd driven through once, years ago, without stopping. He gave it to her the way he gave her everything, directly, with no excess language around it, like he'd stripped all the social lubrication out of human communication and found he didn't miss it. "What do I need to know?" she asked. "My mother's name is Vivian. She's the one who matters. My father is not in the picture. I have a younger brother, Marcus, who will try to charm you, and a sister, Elaine, who will try to unnerve you. Neither of them should be given more than they ask for." "What about you?" A pause. "What about me? If your family thinks we've been together 3 months, they'll have questions about you. About us. I need to know what I'm supposed to know." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, something in the quality of his voice had shifted. Not much, just enough to notice. "That's a reasonable concern. Thank you. I'll pick you up tomorrow instead of sending a car. We can cover the details on the way." "I thought you were sending a car." "I changed my mind." Sienna looked at the dress hanging on her closet door, the version of herself she'd never been given the budget to be. 6:30, she said. 7. 6:30, she said again, evenly. "I don't like being rushed." Another pause. Then, 6:30. She hung up before he could say anything else, because she'd learned a long time ago that the person who speaks last isn't always the one with the power, but the person who ends the conversation usually is. He arrived at 6:28. She was ready at 6:27, which she wouldn't have admitted to anyone. His car was black, not flashy, the kind of vehicle that communicated wealth through restraint rather than excess. He got out when she came through the building's front door, which she hadn't expected. She'd assumed he'd sit in the car and wait. He stood beside the passenger door in a dark suit and a gray coat and looked at her with an expression she still could not read. "You look," he started. "I know," she said, and got in the car. He stood outside for a moment longer than necessary. Then he got in the driver's side and pulled out onto the street, and for several minutes neither of them said anything at all. The city moved past the windows. Still dark at this hour, just barely starting to gray at the edges. The freezing rain had cleared overnight and left everything looking swept clean and sharp, every surface carrying a thin skin of ice that caught the streetlights and broke them into pieces. "How long have we been together?" Sienna said finally. 3 months and 11 days. We met at an event for the Elsinore Foundation, a charity auction in October. You were a guest of a colleague of mine named Patricia Wells. Do I like Patricia Wells? You find her entertaining, but unreliable. Close enough to real. Sienna looked out the window. How did you ask me out? I didn't, he said. You gave me your number. She turned to look at him. Women give you their numbers unprompted. Some of them. And that's the story you told your family. It's the story that fit. She looked back out the window, turned it over. What's my job in this version? You work in healthcare administration. A beat. It isn't far from the truth. You could have said I was a waitress. I could have. Would they have had a problem with that? He was quiet for a moment. Marcus wouldn't. Elaine would have filed it away to use later. And your mother? He didn't answer immediately. Outside, the city was giving way to highway, to flat dark fields on either side, to the particular loneliness of pre-dawn travel. My mother, he said finally, will make her own determination regardless of what I tell her. Sienna watched the fields go by. Thought about what that meant. Thought about Adrian Blackwell, who her son had described as the one who matters, a formulation that carried its own complicated weight. Adrian, she said. He glanced at her, the first time he'd looked directly at her since they'd gotten in the car. What is your family, actually? The highway unspooled ahead of them, white lane lines in the headlights, the first thin blush of morning light at the absolute edge of the horizon. He didn't answer, which was, she was beginning to understand, an answer of its own. And by the time she understood what she was really asking, what she was really stepping into, the city was 30 miles behind her, and the Blackwell estate had begun to materialize out of the gray December morning like something that had been there forever, waiting for exactly this moment, like it had always known she was coming. Hãy nhận thích và để lại tên thành phố bạn đang xem trong phần bình luận. Tôi muốn biết câu chuyện này đã đi được bao xa. Phần 2 sẽ tiết lộ điều mà không ai trong gia đình Blackwell đã chuẩn bị cho, kể cả chính Adrian. The Blackwell estate did not announce itself the way money usually did. There were no fountains, no marble lions flanking the entrance, no architectural excess designed to make visitors feel small before they'd even stepped inside. What there was instead was a long, private road lined with bare winter oaks, their branches locked together overhead like the fingers of two hands pressing against each other. And at the end of that road, a house that sat in the gray December morning with the quiet authority of something that had simply always existed and would go on existing long after everything around it had changed. It was large. That was unavoidable. 3 stories of dark stone and iron-framed windows, a wide front porch that wrapped around the south side, outbuildings visible at the back edge of the property through the skeletal tree line. But the size wasn't the thing that struck her. What struck her was the stillness of it. The way the house sat in its landscape without apology or performance, like it had nothing to prove. Sienna kept her hands in her lap and said nothing as Adrian pulled through the front gate, iron, heavy, operated remotely, and followed the road up toward the house. There were 2 other cars already parked on the wide gravel sweep at the front. A third was partially visible around the side of the building. How many people? She said. Family only, 8, possibly 9. You don't know how many people are coming to your own family dinner. My sister may have brought someone. She tends not to announce these things in advance. Sienna looked at the house, at the iron-framed windows, at the 2 men she could see positioned on either side of the front entrance who were not, she was fairly certain, hired to take coats. The men at the door, she said. Yes. Standard for a family dinner? Standard for this family. He pulled the car to a stop on the gravel and cut the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. The cold outside was visible. She could see it in the quality of the light, thin and flat, and offering no warmth. A crow moved through the bare branches of one of the oaks and was gone. Sienna. She turned. He was looking at the house, not at her. His profile in the morning light was sharp and still and told her exactly nothing. "Whatever you see inside," he said, "whatever you hear, don't show them you're shaken." "I've been working a diner counter since I was 19, she said. "I've seen shaken. I don't do shaken." He turned then, looked at her directly. Something moved behind his eyes. That thing she'd noticed in the diner, that submerged quality, like something large moving far beneath still water. "Good," he said. He got out of the car. She got out of the car. He came around to her side, not in the affected way of a man performing gallantry, but in the practical way of a man who had decided to do something and was doing it. He stopped beside her, didn't touch her. "For reference," he said quietly, just for her, "you call me Adrian." "Not Adrian, sir. Not Mr. Blackwell. Just Adrian. The first time you forget, Elaine will notice." "I wasn't going to call you sir." People get nervous and revert to formality. "I'm not nervous." He looked at her again with that same unreadable steadiness. "No," he said, "you're not." They walked toward the house together, close but not touching. The gravel was loud under her shoes. The two men at the door tracked their approach with the peripheral, non-reactive attention of professionals, and then one of them stepped forward and opened the door, and the warmth from inside came out like a held breath released. The entrance hall was high-ceilinged and dark-paneled and smelled like wood smoke and something faintly herbal that she couldn't place. A staircase curved upward on the right. Ahead, a wide corridor led back into the deeper interior of the house. There were paintings on the walls, real ones, oil and canvas, dark with age, and a console table with a vase of white flowers that were the only bright thing in the room. A woman appeared at the far end of the corridor. She moved the way certain women move when they've spent decades being looked at and have long since stopped caring, with a kind of absolute occupation of space, unhurried, measured. She was perhaps 60, possibly older, with dark hair shot through with silver that she wore pulled back severely. She was dressed in black with no jewelry except a thin gold band on her right hand. Her face was angular, composed, and contained exactly the expression of a woman who had seen a great many things and had developed the habit of assessment before reaction. Adrian Blackwell. She walked the full length of the corridor without saying anything, and when she arrived in the entrance hall, she looked at Sienna for a long moment before she looked at her son. "You're late," she said to Adrian. Her voice was low and precise, the kind that didn't need volume. 6 minutes, he said. "I know how many minutes." She looked back at Sienna, not hostile, not warm, something in between that was more unsettling than either. "You're Sienna." "Yes, ma'am." Something crossed Vivian's face at that. Not displeasure, the opposite. "Come in," she said. "Everyone else has already been standing around making small talk for 20 minutes, and I've been running out of patience." She turned and walked back the way she'd come. Adrian touched Sienna's elbow. Once, briefly, barely contact, and they followed. The sitting room at the back of the house was large enough to feel like a room people actually lived in rather than displayed themselves in. A fire was going in the stone fireplace. There were 4 people already there, arranged across various chairs and sofas with the loose, semi-comfortable posture of people who knew each other too well to bother performing ease. Marcus Blackwell was immediately identifiable. He was younger than Adrian by what looked like several years, built similarly but carrying himself with deliberate lightness, like a man who had decided early on that the best way to survive in a heavy family was to make everything seem like it weighed nothing. He was good-looking in an open, uncomplicated way. He stood up when they came in, and his smile came fast and without apparent calculation. "Finally," he said. "I was starting to think you'd turned around on the highway." "Sit down, Marcus," Adrian said. "Nice to meet you," Marcus said directly to Sienna, not sitting down, extending a hand. "He didn't tell us anything about you, which means he's either protecting you or protecting himself, and with Adrian it's usually both." Sienna shook his hand. "Sienna Hart. I know. Mom's been saying your name with that particular tone she uses when she's already decided she likes someone, but doesn't want to admit it yet." "Marcus?" Vivian said from across the room. It was one word delivered at normal conversational volume, and Marcus immediately turned and sat down. Elaine Blackwell was standing near the window. She had Adrian's height and her mother's precision, and she was looking at Sienna with an expression that was arranged into something courteous, but functioned like a scan. She was perhaps 35, impeccably dressed, with a glass of water in one hand and a stillness about her that was different from her brother's stillness. His was controlled, hers was watchful. "Elaine," Adrian said. "Adrian?" She moved her gaze from Sienna to her brother and then back again. "You look tired." "I'm fine." "You look tired," she said again pleasantly, as though she were talking about the weather. Beside Elaine stood a man Sienna didn't know. Late 30s, blonde, with the compact, squared-off build of a former athlete and the look of someone who was working very hard to appear relaxed. He was introduced as Daniel, Elaine's partner, and he shook Sienna's hand with both of his and said he'd heard so much about her. She smiled and said she hadn't heard nearly enough about him, which made Marcus laugh and made Elaine's eyes sharpen slightly, which told Sienna something useful. The ninth person was an older man named Gareth, a family associate, she gathered, without it being spelled out for her, who sat in the corner with a glass of something amber and nodded at her once and then returned to studying the fire. They moved through the next hour in the way that complicated families move through time together, with elaborate performance of normalcy stretched across undercurrents that everyone pretended not to feel. Sienna drank coffee and answered the questions people asked her with the carefully calibrated honesty of someone who was telling truth-adjacent things and knew it. The work she'd described as healthcare administration was close enough to what she actually did at the billing company that the details came easily. The story of meeting at the foundation event was something she and Adrian had covered in enough detail on the drive that she could navigate it. What she hadn't anticipated was how much Vivian would watch her. Not aggressively, not with suspicion, with something more difficult to categorize, a focused, sustained attention that felt almost clinical in its patience. Every time Sienna said something, Vivian heard it. Every time she moved, Vivian tracked it. Not the way people watch something they distrust, the way people watch something they're trying to understand. At one point, while Marcus was telling a story about some logistics problem with a property in New Mexico that involved both a misunderstanding with a county assessor and what appeared to be an illegally parked 18-wheeler, Sienna looked up and found Vivian watching her instead of her son. Their eyes held for a moment. Vivian looked away first, which Sienna did not expect. Lunch was in a formal dining room that had been made less formal through use. The table was long and dark and beautiful and set with real silver, but there were water rings on the sideboard, and one of the chairs had a cracked back leg that had been repaired with what appeared to be wire. The room smelled like the roast that had been in an oven somewhere in the back of the house for hours. A woman Sienna didn't see introduced appeared with bread and then disappeared again. Elaine started in on Sienna approximately 7 minutes after they sat down. She did it the way experienced people do it. Not directly, not obviously, but with the patience of a person who had been conducting this kind of interview for years and had learned the value of indirection. "So the foundation event," Elaine said, pulling bread apart with 2 fingers. "October. I was at that event, actually." Sienna kept her hand still in her lap, kept her face neutral. Across the table, she was aware of Marcus going slightly more still. "Were you?" she said. I don't recall seeing you." "It was a large event." "It was," Elaine agreed pleasantly. "Though I do tend to notice the people Adrian pays attention to. He's not the most socially expressive person in a room." She smiled. It was a complete and technically perfect smile. "He tends to stand in corners." "He was standing near the bar," Sienna said. "I was looking for Patricia Wells and I walked into him. Literally. He had a drink and I nearly made him spill it." Marcus made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Patricia Wells," Elaine said. "You know her?" "Of her." A pause. "She's not especially reliable." "No," Sienna agreed. "But she's entertaining." Something moved through Elaine's expression that was too quick for Sienna to fully catch. Then Elaine looked at her brother, who was cutting the bread on his plate with a knife and had not looked up. "You didn't mention the foundation event to me," she said to Adrian. "I didn't mention most of October to you," he said without looking up. "You mentioned the Hargrove deal. The Hargrove deal required your signature." "And Sienna didn't require a mention?" He set down the knife, looked across the table at his sister with an expression that didn't change but hardened in a way that was visible, the way water hardens to ice. Same substance, completely different quality. "Elaine," he said. One word, flat, final. Elaine picked up her water glass. Vivian, at the head of the table, said nothing, but she was watching Sienna again. After a moment, Sienna picked up her fork, looked down at her plate. Let the silence finish itself. New Mexico, she said to Marcus. The 18-wheeler story. You said the county assessor was involved. What did he actually cite you for? Marcus blinked. Then the tension leaked out of his face and he picked it back up. The story, the lightness, the warmth he deployed like a tool. Okay, so this is genuinely the most bureaucratic nightmare I've been involved in since the Burlington thing. And just like that, the room started breathing again. After lunch, while the men had moved into what Vivian called the study, with a tone that communicated the word meant something specific in this house, Sienna stood near the windows in the sitting room and looked out at the winter garden. The formal beds had gone dormant. A stone bench was visible at the far end, dusted white at the edges where the frost had not quite melted. She heard Elaine before she felt her. He looks different. Sienna turned. Elaine was standing at the other end of the window, a fresh glass of water in hand, looking out at the same view. Different how? Sienna said. Less like he's managing a situation. Elaine's voice had changed. Something dropped out of it. Some quality of performance that Sienna hadn't even realized was there until it was gone. What remained underneath was quieter and more tired. My brother has been managing situations for so long that it's become the only expression he has. It's like watching someone hold their breath for years. She glanced sideways at Sienna. He looks like he's breathing today. Sienna said nothing. I'm not trying to intimidate you, Elaine said. I know, Sienna said. I'm trying to figure out if you understand what you're in. The winter garden sat in its silence outside. Somewhere in the deeper interior of the house, there were voices, too muffled to make words of. You could just ask, Sienna said. I'm asking. Then the answer is, more than you think I do, and probably less than I should. She looked at Elaine directly. And I'm still here. Elaine studied her for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised Sienna completely. She exhaled. Not dramatically, just a breath released, the way a person releases a tension they've been holding long enough that they'd stopped noticing it. He has enemies, Elaine said low. Not the theoretical kind. The kind that have been patient. I gathered. Has he told you anything specific? No. Then he will. She looked back out at the garden. Whether he plans to or not. A pause. The fact that he brought you here means you're already in the circle, whether either of you have formalized it. These people, the ones watching this family, they don't distinguish between actual and assumed. Sienna felt something move through her chest. Not panic, something colder, more precise. You're warning me, she said. I'm giving you information, Elaine said. What you do with it is your business. She set down her water glass on the console table, straightened, and walked toward the door. Then she stopped. The foundation event story, she said, without turning around. It's good. The detail about the drink is good. But Patricia Wells left the event at 8:45 because her daughter called from Boston. A beat. If anyone who was actually there decides to verify the timeline, make sure you and Adrian have a reason you were still there after 9. Then she walked out. Her footsteps were precise and quiet on the hardwood floor, and then they faded, and Sienna was alone with the winter garden and the thing Elaine had just put in her hands. She stood there for a long moment, then she pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app and typed, After 9. Foundation. Reason we stayed. And then she closed it and put the phone away and went to find Adrian. She found him alone in the hallway outside the study, standing at a window. The voices she'd heard earlier had stopped. His back was to her, and he was standing very still, one hand pressed flat against the wall beside the window frame, looking out. She stopped a few feet from him. Elaine told me about the timeline, she said. He turned. His face had changed from what it had been at the table. Something had moved across it and hadn't finished moving. There was tension in his jaw and something in his eyes that was closer to the surface than anything she'd seen from him before. What did she tell you? His voice was careful. Though we need a reason to still be at the event after 9. She watched his face. What happened in the study? Nothing that concerns Adrian. He looked at her. She kept her eyes level, kept her hands loose at her sides. The way you hold yourself when you want to convey that you aren't going anywhere. Something in him shifted. Not a collapse, nothing so dramatic. More like a small giving way, a door that had been braced suddenly having the pressure behind it drop a degree. "A man named Harlan Voss," he said. "He runs 3 distribution operations out of the Northeast. He's been pushing into territory that—" He stopped, looked at the window, looked back at her. "He sent a message through Gareth this morning." "What kind of message?" "The kind that ends with a location and a suggested time." Sienna processed that. The hallway was cool and dim, lit by natural light from the window. Somewhere further in the house she could hear Vivian's voice and Marcus responding and the ordinary domestic sounds of a house being inhabited. "He wants a meeting?" she said. "He wants a demonstration." "Of what?" "That I'm worth meeting with." She looked at him, at the way his hand had moved from the wall and was now at his side, closed into a fist that he appeared to be barely aware of, at the way his jaw was set, at the exhaustion underneath all of it, that deep structural tiredness that you accumulated not in weeks, but in years. "And are you going?" she said. "I don't have a choice that doesn't cost something." "That's not the same as not having a choice." He looked at her sharply. "Don't." "I'm not doing anything," she said evenly. "I'm listening to you talk about a choice you've already made and describing it as if it was made for you." His jaw worked. For a moment she thought he was going to say something that would end this. End the careful, constructed proximity they'd built since the diner, pull the curtain back down, return them to employer and contracted prop. Instead he said, "You're right." Just that. 2 words. And the effort it cost him was visible. She let it settle. "The dress Elaine is wearing," she said after a moment. "The fabric on the cuffs. I was going to ask where she got it." He stared at her. "What?" "We need a reason to have stayed past 9. Elaine was there. She was wearing something worth asking about. Women talk about clothes at these things." She kept her voice practical, deliberately unglamorous. "Now we have a memory. Elaine stayed later because of something to do with Daniel. We ran into her on the way out and Elaine told me where to find the fabric for the cuffs, and we got into a conversation and the next thing it was 10:30. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression was doing something she couldn't name. "You're very good at this," he said. "I'm very good at solving the problem in front of me," she said. "That's different." He was still looking at her with that expression. She felt the weight of it and didn't look away from it, because looking away was a tell, and she was done giving this man tells. "I should take you back before dark," he said. "The roads ice up early this stretch." "I know." "My mother will want another 20 minutes with you." "I know that too." He almost smiled. Not quite. "She likes you." "She's deciding whether to like me." "No," he said. "She's already decided. The deciding she's doing now is about what that means." Dot. Vivian found her in the kitchen. Not the formal one. There was a back kitchen, smaller, older, the kind of room that had been used before the house was renovated around it. A scrubbed wooden table, copper pots hung on a rail. A window over the sink that looked out at the property's eastern edge, where the oak trees started up again. Sienna had gone looking for water and instead found this room and stood in it for a moment because it was the only place in the house that felt like it didn't have a position. Then Vivian came in. She didn't pretend she'd come for water. She didn't perform an accidental arrival. She walked into the back kitchen like she owned it, which she did, and stood on the other side of the wooden table and looked at Sienna with that focused, patient attention she'd been deploying all day. "Sit down," she said. Sienna sat down. Vivian pulled out the chair across from her and sat as well, which somehow made it more serious rather than less. She folded her hands on the table. "I'm going to ask you something direct," she said, "and I would like a direct answer." "All right." "Do you love my son?" Sienna held her gaze. The question was a trap in every direction, and Vivian knew it and was asking anyway, which meant the answer mattered less than the way it was answered. "I don't know him well enough to love him," Sienna said, "but I think I'm starting to want to." Vivian studied her for a long moment. Then something moved across her face. Not warmth, exactly, but its precondition. The thing that comes before warmth. "He hasn't slept through a night in 3 years," she said, "that I know of, possibly longer." She looked down at her hands. "He carries things the way his father did, without asking for help and without putting them down." She looked back up. His father died of it, in the end. Not violently, just wore through. Sienna said nothing. I'm not telling you this to burden you, Vivian said. I'm telling you because you are clearly not a person who makes decisions without information, and I think you should have this one. Outside the window, the last of the December light was going gray and flat. The oak tree line was darkening toward black. What happened to the last woman he was with? Sienna asked. Vivian's expression didn't change. She left, she said, when she understood what the life was. How long were they together? 4 years. The back kitchen was quiet. The copper pots hung still. I appreciate you telling me, Sienna said. I'm not warning you away, Vivian said. I want to be clear about that. I'm warning you toward it with both eyes open. She paused. He needs someone who won't look away from the hard parts. He barely knows me, Sienna said. He knew enough to bring you here, Vivian said, and he has never brought anyone here. The words sat on the table between them. Sienna felt something tighten low in her chest. Not fear. Something more like the specific vertigo of standing at a height and realizing the ground was farther down than you'd estimated. She thought about the $50,000, about the card on the diner counter, about the way she'd told herself it was a transaction, a clean exchange, the simple arithmetic of debt and need. She thought about Elaine in the sitting room, telling her about the timeline and the exhaustion in her voice when she dropped the performance. She thought about Adrian in the hallway, saying, "You're right," like the words cost him something real. I need to get my coat, she said finally. Vivian nodded. Sienna stood, pushed her chair in, then she stopped, turned back. He's going to the meeting, she said. Boss? Vivian's face went very still. I think you already knew that, Sienna said. I think that's why Gareth is here. A long pause. The copper pots hung motionless. Outside, full dark had come, and the window was now just black. Yes, Vivian said quietly. I knew. How dangerous is it? Vivian looked at her hands again, then up, and in her expression, for the first time all day, Sienna saw the thing that lived beneath all the composure, something old and terrible and deeply tired. Very, she said. Sienna stood in the back kitchen of the Blackwell estate and understood, with the specific, unwanted clarity of a person who has been lied to not by another person, but by their own assumptions, that she had not been hired for one evening. She had been chosen for something she didn't yet have a name for. And somewhere in the deeper rooms of the house, Adrian Blackwell was about to walk into the first of the decisions that would either save him or destroy everything around him, including her. She went to get her coat. The drive back was quiet in a different way than the drive out had been. On the way to the estate, the silence between them had been the silence of two strangers negotiating the terms of proximity, careful, measured, full of the particular tension of people who don't yet know how much space to give each other. This silence was different. This was the silence of two people who had both learned something they couldn't unlearn and were separately deciding what to do with it. Adrian drove. His hands were on the wheel at 10 and 2, relaxed in the technical sense, but his jaw was set and his eyes stayed on the road with a fixed quality that wasn't quite attention, more like a man using the act of watching something simple to keep from thinking too hard about something complicated. Sienna sat with her hands in her lap and watched the tree line go by, and thought about Vivian Blackwell's face when she'd said the word very. The estate had disappeared behind them within minutes. The private road gave way to the county highway, and the county highway gave way to the interstate, and the world outside the windows became the ordinary dark of December travel. The red tail lights ahead, the occasional overpass, the flat black sky pressing down on everything. 40 minutes passed. You don't have to keep the money, Adrian said. Sienna turned to look at him. He was still watching the road. What? The 50,000. If you decide by after tonight that you'd rather not be connected to this, to any of it. A pause. I won't take it back, but I wanted you to know it's not a cage. She looked at him for a long moment, at his profile in the dashboard light, at the way his throat moved when he stopped talking. Is that what you think I'm sitting here calculating? She said. I think you're sitting there deciding something, he said. And I think you deserve the options laid out clearly. Your mother told me about the meeting with Voss. His hands tightened on the wheel, a small adjustment, almost nothing. She would have missed it if she hadn't been watching. She shouldn't have done that, he said. She did it anyway. It doesn't concern Adrian? She kept her voice even, not soft, not hard, just level. You brought me into your family home. Your sister told me to account for a timeline. Your mother told me your father wore through from carrying too much alone. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. At what point does "it doesn't concern you" stop being something you can actually say to me? The interstate moved under them. A semi-truck passed in the left lane with a sound like displaced weather. He didn't answer, which was the same as answering. When is the meeting? She said. Sienna? When? Another long pause, the kind that a man takes when he's deciding whether the effort of resistance is worth what it costs. Thursday, he said. 4 days. Yes. And Gareth arranged it. Gareth facilitated contact. Voss arranged it. She looked back out at the road. Is Gareth loyal to you or to the family? The pause before he answered this one was different, shorter, more clipped, and what was in it was not reluctance, but something sharper. The family, he said. Are those the same thing right now? He looked at her then, for the first time since they'd gotten in the car. It was a quick look. The road required him back almost immediately. But in that brief turn she saw it. The thing he hadn't let her see all day. Not in the house, not in the hallway, not across the dinner table. He was afraid. Not of Voss. Not of the meeting. Of something more structural than that. The fear of a man standing on a foundation he's been building for years and beginning to feel the first hairline fractures running through it. She looked back out at the dark. She didn't say anything else about it. Not that night. He did not take her back to Delmore Street. She didn't ask why. He said there was a security matter he needed to address in the morning and that the guest suite at his city residence was available and she could leave early if she preferred. He said it in the clipped, logistical way he said most things, and she heard underneath it what he wasn't saying, which was that he didn't want to put her in her apartment at midnight and drive away without knowing the door would hold. His city residence was a brownstone in a neighborhood that was old and quiet and had the particular character of a place where serious money lived without needing to advertise. There was no concierge. There were 2 men inside who acknowledged Adrian with nods and moved through the house with the same professional periphery she'd noticed at the estate. The house itself was not cold exactly, but it was the kind of place that had been designed rather than accumulated. Everything in it was chosen. Nothing had been left by accident, except she noticed a single paperback novel on the kitchen counter, spine cracked, clearly read more than once, a bookmark of folded receipt paper about 2/3 through. It was the kind of detail that didn't belong to the room and was more revealing because of it. She looked at it without picking it up. Adrian appeared from somewhere in the back with a glass of water and set it on the counter near her. The guest room is upstairs, he said. Second door on the left. What are you reading? She said. He stopped, looked at the paperback like he'd forgotten it was there. It's nothing. She picked it up. A novel she'd read in college, a battered copy, the cover illustration faded. She opened to the bookmark. The page was unmarked. No notes, no underlines. Just the reading, which somehow said more. I read this in a single sitting my junior year, she said. In the laundry room of my dorm because my roommate had people over and I needed somewhere quiet. He looked at the book in her hands with an expression she couldn't fully interpret. It was my father's copy, he said. Originally. She put it back on the counter exactly where she'd found it. Good night, she said. Good night, he said. She went upstairs. She lay in the dark of the guest room for a long time, looking at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her, and did not sleep for a very long time. The next 2 weeks happened the way important things sometimes happen. Not in dramatic declaration, but in the accumulation of small, ordinary moments that only reveal their weight in retrospect. She went back to Delmore Street. She worked her shifts. She went to the billing company on Tuesday mornings and sat in a beige office under fluorescent light and entered numbers into forms. She sent her brother $300 and did not explain it. Adrian called twice that first week. Not about Voss, not about the family. He called and asked her questions that had nothing to do with business. what she'd been reading, whether she'd fixed the weather stripping on her window, what she thought of a particular piece in the Times about urban rezoning that he'd apparently read and formed an opinion on and then wanted to argue about. She argued back. He called a third time on Friday of the second week, and the conversation lasted 2 hours. And when she finally said she needed to sleep, he was quiet for a moment before saying that he'd been thinking about the novel on his kitchen counter and whether she'd want to read it again. She said she'd already read it. He said he knew. She said, "Then why are you asking?" He said, "Because I want an excuse to see you." She was quiet for a moment. "You don't need an excuse," she said. He was quiet on his end. Then, "That's not a sentence I know how to use." "Practice," she said, and hung up. Michok. He called the next morning at 8 and said he'd like to take her to dinner. She said yes. Dinner was at a restaurant she didn't know, small and without signage. The kind of place that existed in the margins of the city for people who needed to be somewhere good without being seen. They sat at a corner table and ate food that was extraordinary and talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with the Blackwell family, or Harlan Voss, or federal investigations, or any of the structural realities pressing in from outside. They talked about her brother, whose name was Danny, who was 31 and had a bad back and worked at a fulfillment warehouse outside Pittsburgh, and who called her on his days off to tell her about the podcast he was currently obsessed with. She didn't usually talk about Danny. She talked about him for 40 minutes while Adrian listened with the specific, unhurried attention of a person who was not waiting for his turn to speak, but was actually, genuinely listening. He talked about a summer he'd spent at 16 working in a machine shop in Ohio, while his father dealt with something the family had referred to as a situation. He described the shop owner, a man named Clarence, who had been 64 and deeply opinionated about steel, and had treated 16-year-old Adrian with a matter-of-fact respect that he'd carried with him ever since and never fully explained to anyone. She watched him talk about Clarence and thought, this is who he would have been. The thought arrived without permission, and she let it settle without trying to do anything with it. When they left the restaurant, the night was very cold and she could see her breath in the air. He walked beside her to the car, and their arms were close enough that the contact was a question, present but not answered. She answered it. She reached out and took his hand. He stopped walking. She kept her eyes forward, kept walking. His hand in hers was warm and very still for exactly 2 seconds, and then his fingers closed around hers, and they walked to the car like that, not talking, and the cold December night moved around them, and she felt something happen in her chest that she'd been half expecting for 2 weeks and still wasn't ready for. 3 days later, her apartment was broken into. She didn't know it immediately. She came home from the billing company at 6:45 in the evening, unlocked her door, stepped inside. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it. Nothing was overturned. Nothing was moved. Nothing was taken. She knew something was wrong the way you know someone has been in your house, not from evidence but from the changed quality of the air, the sense of the space having been recently occupied by something that wasn't you. She stood in the doorway for a full 30 seconds before she moved. Then she checked every room, the bathroom, the closet, under the bed with the phone flashlight, which was something she hadn't done since she was a child and felt ridiculous doing now, and did it anyway. The kitchen window latch, the fire escape. Everything was locked. Everything was where she'd left it. Almost. The paperwork on her kitchen table, the stack of envelopes she'd been opening and closing for weeks. The lease notices and the credit card statements had been shifted, not dramatically. Just enough. The way a person shifts papers when they've gone through them and replaced them carefully without quite remembering the original order. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the shifted papers and felt something very cold and very specific move through her from the sternum outward. She called Adrian. He answered on the second ring. "Someone was in my apartment," she said. The pause on his end lasted less than 2 seconds. "Are you there now?" "Yes." "Don't touch anything else. I'm sending someone." "Adrian, listen to me. Do not touch anything. Don't open any windows. Turn on every light in the apartment and stay in the room with the most visibility from the street. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 14 minutes. He came with 2 men she hadn't seen before, who moved through her apartment with a thoroughness and a quiet that made her feel both safer and more frightened simultaneously. Adrian stood in the center of her kitchen and looked at the shifted papers on the table, and his face did the thing she'd seen it do in the hallway at the estate. Hardened, got colder, became something that was still his face, but stripped of whatever warmth the past 2 weeks had put into it. "Nothing was taken," she said. "I've checked everything." "Nothing was meant to be taken," he said. She looked at him. "Then what was the point?" He was still looking at the papers. "The point was for you to know they were here." The apartment felt smaller. The radiator knocked. "Who?" she said. "Voss's people, most likely." He looked up. "Or someone who wants me to think it was Voss's people." "That's a meaningful distinction." "Yes." He looked around the apartment with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something that might have been guilt if she'd been willing to name it. "Pack a bag," he said. "I'm not... Sienna." His voice was very quiet. "Please." She looked at him for a long moment, at the controlled set of his face and the thing moving underneath it that he wasn't letting out, at the men in her apartment, in her space, moving through the rooms she'd made livable through years of careful effort and small economies. She went and packed a bag. He moved her into the brownstone that night. She had a room, a bathroom, a key. She was introduced to the patterns of the house, when the men changed shifts, which doors required codes, where everything was in the kitchen. She was told nothing she didn't ask for, and when she asked, she was answered directly. She told herself it was temporary. She learned in the days that followed that the brownstone ran on a different clock than the rest of the world. Adrian left early and returned late, and sometimes not at all until the following morning. And when he came back, there was always something different about him, a quality of the air around him, a particular stillness that she began to understand was the stillness of a man replacing one state of being with another, like changing clothes in a doorway. She learned not to ask where he'd been. She learned instead to ask about other things, about Clarence and the machine shop, about books, about the property in New Mexico that Marcus had been managing and was apparently a source of ongoing low-grade exasperation. She asked him questions that had nothing to do with the business, and he answered them with a gradual loosening that she watched happen over days, like ice going out in a slow spring, not dramatically but incrementally, day by day. Then came the gun range. It was a Tuesday. He'd told her nothing in advance, just said to wear something warm and to bring the boots she'd been using for her fire escape check, which told her they were going somewhere without a dress code. The range was 40 minutes outside the city on a private property that had no sign and no apparent purpose beyond the long-covered firing line and the cleared land behind it. The cold was very serious at this distance from the city, a clean, functional cold that didn't negotiate. He gave her ear protection and safety glasses and a handgun that was smaller than she'd expected and heavier than it looked. He stood behind her, not quite touching, and talked her through it in the same voice he used when he was telling her something he considered important but wasn't going to underline. Grip, stance, breath, trigger pull, not jerk, pull. The distinction mattered. She missed the first 4 shots, not dramatically, just not where she was looking. "You're anticipating," he said. "I know, I can feel myself doing it." "So stop." "You say that like it's a decision." "It is," he said. "Anticipating the consequence is a choice. You're already deciding what happens before you've committed to the action." She looked at the target down the range, thought about that, adjusted her grip. The 5th shot hit the paper. She felt him exhale behind her, not dramatically, just the small release of a person who had been more invested in an outcome than they'd let on. She shot the rest of the magazine. 3 of the remaining shots were good, 2 were not. She lowered the weapon when it locked empty, and he reached past her to engage the safety, and his hand was briefly over hers on the weapon, and neither of them moved for a moment. The range was very quiet except for the wind. "I need to tell you something," he said. She didn't turn around. "All right," she said. "The meeting with Voss isn't what it was described to me as." She waited. Gareth presented it as a negotiation meeting, a territory conversation. His voice was very even. "I had someone look into Voss's recent movements, his security arrangements, the venue he proposed." A pause. The wind moved across the range. "It's not a negotiation." She turned around then. He was standing close, closer than he'd been during the lesson. His face was back to that stripped quality. No warmth, no performance, but there was something in it now that hadn't been there at the estate, or in the hallway, or in any of the careful weeks between then and now. "What is it?" she said. "An ending," he said, "or the beginning of one." She held his gaze. "You're telling me because you've decided to go anyway. I'm telling you because you've earned the information. That's not a reason." "No." Something in his expression shifted. "I'm telling you because I don't want to do what my father did. I don't want to carry something alone until it wears through." The wind came again. Her ears were cold above the hearing protection. Behind him, the cleared land ran back to a tree line that was bare and dark against the flat winter sky. "Then don't go," she said. "It's not—" "Don't go," she said again. Simple. Not a plea. A statement of preference delivered at the same volume as everything else. He looked at her for a long moment. The gun range was completely silent now. No other shooters, no staff visible. Just the two of them and the cold and the empty targets down the line. Then he kissed her. Not a question, not a test. The way a man kisses someone when the decision has already been made and the only thing left is the doing of it. She felt the cold of his hands on either side of her face, and she let the gun hang at her side and kissed him back with the same quality, certain, unhurried, committed to the thing itself rather than what came after. When they separated, he kept his hands where they were. His eyes were still closed for a moment. When he opened them, he looked at her with something completely uncovered, and she understood that nobody else had seen this. Not Vivian, not Elaine, not anyone. This particular expression on this particular face, which was simply a man who had decided something and was terrified of it. "I still have to go," he said. "I know," she said, "but not yet." "No," she said, "not yet." She found the photograph 6 days later. It was not planted there deliberately. Or if it was, the planning had been done so skillfully that it looked like a simple filing error. She'd been looking for a restaurant reservation she'd written on a notepad that had ended up in the stack of papers on the side table in the study, the room Adrian used in the evenings when he worked, and she'd been looking through the stack without reading anything, just searching for the notepad, when a photograph slid out from between two folders and landed face up on the floor. She picked it up. It was a surveillance photograph. Black and white, slightly grainy, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. She recognized the angle, a high vantage point, looking down on an outdoor meeting of some kind, two men standing across from each other in what appeared to be a parking structure. She recognized Adrian immediately, his height, his posture, the particular way he held himself. She didn't recognize the other man. She flipped the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting she didn't recognize, two things had been written. A date from 4 months ago, and a name. She looked at the name for a long time. Then she put the photograph back exactly where she'd found it and went back to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall. The name on the back of the photograph was Detective Claire Donovan, and the date on the back was 3 weeks before the meeting with Voss had been proposed. Sienna sat very still. She thought about Adrian telling her the meeting wasn't what it had been described as. She thought about Gareth, loyal to the family, not necessarily to Adrian. She thought about Vivian's face saying very in the back kitchen. She thought about Elaine saying the ones watching this family don't distinguish between actual and assumed. She thought about the name on the photograph. Detective. Federal, she assumed. Had to be. She thought about Adrian in a parking structure 4 months ago, talking to a federal detective, and what that meant about either the meeting with Voss or something larger, something she didn't have enough of the picture to name. She sat with it. Then she made herself ask the question that she'd been avoiding since the moment she'd picked up the photograph. Not what does this mean, but what do I do with it? Because there was a federal detective's name on the back of a photograph, and in 4 days Adrian was walking into something his own intelligence told him was not a negotiation, and the two things were either connected or they weren't, and she had no way to know which, and she could ask him directly and he would either answer honestly or he wouldn't, or she could... Her phone buzzed. She looked down at it. Unknown number. The text read only, "We know what you found. Call this number before you talk to him. You have until tomorrow morning." Sienna read it twice. The room was very quiet. She put the phone face down on the bed and pressed both hands flat on her thighs and breathed. Slow, even. The way you breathe when you're behind the counter at 2 in the morning and the world is pressing in and showing it would cost you something you can't afford. She thought, I should throw this away. She thought, I should tell him immediately. She thought, if I tell him immediately and he already knows about Donovan, about whoever just texted me, then someone put that photograph where I would find it, and the question is who and why. She thought about Gareth in the corner of the sitting room, studying the fire. She thought about the meeting in 4 days. She picked up the phone. She did not call Adrian. She did not call the unknown number. She opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she'd added to her phone 2 weeks ago after Elaine had pulled her aside after the dinner gathering was breaking up, pressed a card into her hand and said, if something happens that you don't know how to bring to Adrian directly, you bring it to me, day or night. That is not an offer I make to anyone. Elaine answered on the first ring. I need to see you, Sienna said. A pause of exactly 1 second. Where are you now? Elaine said. The brownstone. Don't go anywhere. Another pause. Don't talk to anyone in that house until I get there. The line went dead. Sienna put the phone down and looked at the wall and felt the shape of the thing she was in, the full dimensions of it, finally, without the partial vision she'd been operating with since the diner. She felt it the way you feel the edge of something in the dark, not by seeing it, but by the way your hand finds it, and the cold of it comes up through your fingers. She thought about what Elaine would tell her. She thought about what Elaine might already know. And she thought, with a clarity that arrived not as decision, but as recognition, the way your body sometimes tells you the truth before your mind catches up, that whatever Elaine said when she arrived, whatever the photograph meant, whatever the unknown number wanted from her, everything that happened next was going to come down to a single question that she hadn't asked herself clearly until this moment. Not what does Adrian know? Not who sent the text. The question was simpler and more terrible than either of those. The question was, when it comes to it, when the moment arrives and you have to choose between his safety and his trust, which one do? Elaine arrived in 41 minutes. Sienna knew because she'd been watching the clock on her phone with the specific involuntary attention of a person whose mind needed something measurable to hold on to. She'd sat on the edge of the bed for the first 15 minutes. Then she'd moved to the chair by the window. Then she'd stood at the window itself, looking down at the street below, watching the ordinary night traffic of the neighborhood, a couple walking a dog, a taxi moving slowly through the intersection, a man in a coat stopping to check his phone under a streetlight. She watched all of it with the hyperclarity of someone whose nervous system had decided that everything was data now. Elaine came through the front door without knocking. Sienna heard her voice downstairs, brief and low, speaking to one of the men in the house. Then footsteps on the stairs, precise and quick, and then the door to the guest room opened without a knock. Elaine looked at her. You're not panicking, she said. No. Good. She closed the door behind her. She was wearing a dark coat over what appeared to be clothes she'd pulled on quickly. Not her usual composed presentation. Her hair was not perfectly arranged. She looked like a woman who had left somewhere in a hurry and hadn't decided yet whether to be afraid. Show me. Sienna handed her the phone with the text message open. Elaine read it, once, then again. Her expression didn't change, but something moved behind her eyes. A rapid internal calculation that she kept almost completely off her face. Where's the photograph? She said. Study, side table, between 2 folders. I put it back exactly where it fell. You didn't move anything else? No. Elaine handed the phone back. She was quiet for a moment, standing in the center of the room with her arms at her sides, and Sienna recognized the quality of that stillness. It was the same thing she'd seen in Adrian, that specific interior gathering that happened in people who had been trained by their lives to think before they moved. Gareth, Sienna said. Elaine looked at her. The photograph was in the study. Adrian's the only other person who uses that room regularly. If someone planted it, it was someone with access to that room without raising questions. She paused. Gareth's been in and out of this house all week. I know, Elaine said. You already suspected him. I've suspected him for 6 weeks. Her voice was flat and very controlled. I didn't have enough to bring to Adrian. Because Adrian trusts him. Because Gareth was the closest thing to a mentor Adrian had after our father died, Elaine said. And because in this family, accusing someone of that without proof doesn't end with a conversation. She looked at Sienna steadily. It ends with something permanent. The room held that for a moment. Sienna thought about the word permanent and what it meant in the specific context of this family and didn't say anything about it. The text, she said instead. They told me to call before I talk to Adrian, which means either they think I'll keep this from him long enough to be useful, or they already know I'm going to tell him and they want to see how I do it. Or they want you to call, and they want to know what you tell them, Elaine said. Because what you know tells them how much Adrian knows. Sienna looked at her. They're trying to map his intelligence through me. Yes. Because they think I'm a vulnerability. You are a vulnerability, Elaine said without unkindness. Anyone he cares about is. That's not a judgment. That's just how this works. Sienna sat with that. Outside the window, the street had gone quiet. The couple with the dog was long gone. The man under the streetlight was gone. Just the empty intersection and the cold. The meeting with Voss, she said. Thursday. What about it? Adrian told me it's not a negotiation. He said he had intelligence that he told you that. Elaine's voice changed, not louder, just tighter. Yes. When? At the gun range 6 days ago. Elaine turned away from her, walked the 3 steps to the window and stood looking out at the same street Sienna had been watching. Her reflection in the glass was sharp and still. He told you, she said again quietly, to herself rather than to Sienna. Is that significant? He's never told anyone operational information voluntarily. She turned back. Not me, not Marcus, not our mother. Her eyes were very direct. He told you because he's compromised. Compromised. Emotionally. His judgment is he's not running the calculations the same way he was 6 weeks ago. She said it without accusation, but the weight of it was real. Which means he is more dangerous to himself than he realizes. And the people who are watching him know that. Sienna felt something cold run through the center of her chest. The photograph, she said slowly. It wasn't planted to expose him. It was planted to expose me. She worked through it out loud because saying it was the fastest way to check it. They put it where I'd find it. They texted me immediately after. They want to see if I go to him. They want to see if he tells me the truth about Donovan. And if he does, Elaine said, they know exactly how deep his trust in you goes. And if he doesn't, then they've put a crack in the foundation, Elaine said. Either way, they win the information exchange. Sienna stood up from the chair. The movement was decisive enough that Elaine watched it. I need to know about Donovan, Sienna said, before I decide anything. Who is she? Elaine was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Federal, she said. Organized crime division. She's been building a case against the Blackwell family for 4 years. She's patient, and she's thorough, and she has a reputation for turning assets from within organizations. She paused. She approached Adrian 8 months ago. I don't know what she offered him. I don't know what he told her. Another pause. I don't know whose side he's been playing. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Sienna looked at Elaine for a long time. You think he might be cooperating with federal investigators, she said. I think, Elaine said carefully, that my brother has spent the last 3 years looking for a way out of this life that doesn't destroy everyone in it. And I think a woman named Claire Donovan walked up to him and offered him a door. She met Sienna's eyes. What I don't know is what was on the other side of it. The house was very quiet. Then, from downstairs, they heard the front door. Adrian came up the stairs with the sound of a man moving fast, which she'd never heard from him before. He was always so deliberate. Every footstep placed. This was different. This was purpose with the measured quality stripped out of it, which meant something had happened between wherever he'd been and here. He opened the door to the guest room and looked at both of them. His coat was still on. His tie was gone. There was something in his face that she hadn't seen there before. Not quite fear, but the first cousin of it, the thing that lives next door. He looked at Elaine first. Why are you here? Sienna called me. He looked at Sienna. His eyes moved over her face with that rapid searching quality that she'd learned to recognize as his version of panic, not visible in most of his face, but in the eyes themselves, that dark, hunting scan. Something happened, he said. She showed him the text. He read it. The quality of the stillness that came over him was different from anything she'd seen. It wasn't the controlled stillness of a man managing information. It was the stillness of a man discovering that something he'd thought was sealed had opened. "Where did you find the photograph?" he said. "Study. The side table." He turned and walked out of the room. She followed. Elaine followed her. He went directly to the study, went directly to the side table, moved the folders with practiced efficiency until the photograph was in his hand. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned it over and read what was written on the back. His jaw went tight. He set it down on the table face up and stood looking at it. "Adrian," Sienna said. "I know," he said. "I need you to. I know what you need." His voice was very controlled. "Give me a moment." She gave him the moment. Elaine had stopped in the doorway. The study was lined with books and had a desk by the far window and smelled like old paper and the specific scent she'd come to associate entirely with him. And she stood in it and watched him stand over the photograph with his hands at his sides and his jaw set, and she waited. He turned around. "Claire Donovan approached me at an event in February," he said. No preamble, no management, just the information, direct and unadorned. She had documentation on 6 members of this family's operations. She told me she was 18 months from an indictment. She gave me the option to cooperate and negotiate terms, or to let the case proceed and take my chances. Sienna kept her eyes on his. "What did you tell her?" she said. "I told her I needed time." "That was 8 months ago." "Yes." "And since then?" He looked at her steadily. "I've been meeting with her, irregularly. I haven't given her anything actionable about the family." He paused. "I've given her information about Voss." Elaine made a small sound from the doorway that she immediately suppressed. "Because Voss is competition," Sienna said. "Because Voss is the reason the federal case exists," Adrian said. "He's been feeding Donovan information about this family for 2 years to clear the field. If her case succeeds, Voss inherits everything we've built without firing a shot." His voice was flat and precise, and she could hear the exhaustion underneath it. Structural, bone deep. "I've been trying to give Donovan what she needs to take Voss without taking us." The room was very quiet. Sienna thought about the photograph, about who had put it there. "Gareth knows about Donovan," she said. "Gareth arranged 3 of the meetings." Adrian looked at the photograph on the table. "Which means Voss knows." "Which means the meeting Thursday is a kill," he said. "Simple. Final. Not a negotiation, not a demonstration. They're going to walk me into that building, and they're going to end this." The word "end" sat in the room. Sienna felt her pulse in her throat. She kept her hand still. She kept her face still. She thought, "You don't show them you're shaken." "Call Donovan," she said. Both Adrian and Elaine looked at her. "Right now," she said. "Call her. Tell her about the meeting. Give her the location, the time, whatever you have. She wants Voss. Let her have Thursday. If I call Donovan, if you walk into that building Thursday, you're dead," she said. The words came out flat and certain, and she let them be both those things. "Call Donovan. Let the federal operation run. Yes, there's exposure for the family. Yes, it's messy, but you're alive." She held his gaze. "You're alive and Voss goes down and you deal with the fallout from there." Adrian looked at her. Something in his expression was doing something complicated and painful, and she could see the full cost of it, the cost of this moment, of this choice, of having let someone close enough that their voice carried weight when it said the thing you didn't want to hear. "There are 6 men in this family's operation who will be arrested if I make that call," he said. "I know." "People who have been—" "I know," she said again, not cruelly, not without acknowledgement. "I know what it costs. I'm telling you to pay it." He turned away from her, walked to the desk, stood with his back to her, both hands flat on the desk surface, head down. Elaine had not said a word. The house around them was quiet. One of the men on the ground floor moved, floorboards shifting under weight, and then that too went still. "There's another option," Elaine said from the doorway. Sienna looked at her. "We don't call Donovan," Elaine said. "We run our own operation Thursday. We get to the venue before Voss does. We control the environment. Adrian walks in and walks out, and we use whatever happens to deal with Voss ourselves." "How many men do we have?" Adrian said without turning around. "Enough." Voss will have more. Voss will have men expecting to execute one person who thinks he's walking into a negotiation, Elaine said. That's a different thing than men prepared for a counter-operation. The silence stretched. Sienna looked at the back of Adrian's head, at the set of his shoulders, at the particular angle of his spine that she'd learned meant he was carrying something that had gotten heavier in the last several minutes. She thought about what Elaine was proposing. She thought about what she knew about operations that relied on the element of surprise. She thought about 7 things that could go wrong and 3 that would definitely go wrong, and the specific probability of Adrian Blackwell walking out of a building on Thursday night alive if the plan was to outmaneuver a prepared assassination with counter-personnel and the assumption of advantage. She thought about Vivian in the back kitchen, saying very. "No," she said. Elaine looked at her. "We call Donovan," Sienna said, "tonight. That's not your—" "I know it's not my decision," she said. She looked at Adrian's back. "Adrian." He turned around. His face was the photograph of itself, every expression stripped away, down to whatever was actually there beneath all the management and composure and careful architecture of being Adrian Blackwell. What she saw there was a man at the exact edge of something, not broken, not surrendered, but at the edge. "Call her," Sienna said quietly. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He made the call from the study with the door closed. Sienna and Elaine sat in the hallway outside. The floor was hardwood and cold, and Sienna sat with her back against the wall and her knees up and her hands in her lap and stared at the opposite wall and breathed. Elaine sat 3 feet away in the same posture. For several minutes, neither of them said anything. "He's going to hate this," Elaine said finally. "Not tonight. Tonight he'll be clear about it. But after—" "I know," Sienna said. "When the indictments come through. When the men who've been with this family for years go away. When he has to live with what that cost." She paused. "He'll look for somewhere to put it." "I know," Sienna said again. "Are you prepared for that?" Sienna looked at the closed door, heard the low, controlled tone of Adrian's voice through it. Not words, just the cadence, the specific gravity of a man saying something irreversible. "No," she said honestly. Elaine was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said. "People who say they're prepared for things like that are lying." The call lasted 22 minutes. When the door opened, Adrian stood in the frame for a moment before he stepped out, and she looked up at him from the floor, and he looked down at her, and his face had the quality of something that had just been through something it hadn't fully processed yet. Not shattered, just altered, the way metal looks after heat. He slid down the wall and sat on the floor beside her. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. Elaine, after a moment, stood up and said she needed water and went downstairs and did not come back for 15 minutes. They sat on the floor of the hallway in the quiet house, and Sienna did not reach for his hand and he did not reach for hers, and the space between them was charged with everything that had just happened, and she let it be there without trying to fix it. 7 men, he said finally. His voice was quiet and rough at the edges. "I know. Donovan said the operation will move Thursday night, simultaneous with the meeting. They'll take Voss's people at the venue, and they'll run the warrants on the family simultaneously. To prevent anyone warning anyone else," she said. "Yes." She let that sit. "Was it the right call?" he said. Not asking for reassurance, asking because he genuinely didn't know, and had decided she was someone whose answer was worth having. "I think so," she said. "I think you're alive Thursday night if you make this call. I don't think you're alive Thursday night if you don't." She paused. "I think those 2 things together make it the right call even with everything it costs." He was quiet. "I'm not asking you to be comfortable with it," she said. "I know. I'm asking you to stay alive long enough to be uncomfortable with it for a long time." Something moved across his face. Not a smile, too much weight for that, but its distant relative. The suggestion that somewhere in this man there was still the capacity for something lighter than what the last hour had put on him. He leaned his head back against the wall. She leaned hers back beside him. The house was quiet. The clock in the study ticked. Somewhere below them, Elaine was running water. "Sienna," he said. "What?" "After Thursday." He stopped, started again. "I don't know what this family looks like after Thursday. I don't know what I look like after Thursday." Neither do I, she said. It doesn't scare me, she said. That's what you were going to ask. He looked at her. She met his eyes, held them. Let him see that she meant it. You should sleep, she said. I won't. I know, but you should try. Thursday came the way inevitable things come. Not dramatically, but with the particular weight of a date you've been carrying that has finally arrived and can no longer be held at arm's length. Sienna did not go to the billing company. She did not go to the diner. She stayed in the brownstone and moved through the day with the careful, deliberate quality of someone performing normalcy as an act of discipline. Adrian moved through the house differently than he usually did. He was more present. That was the word for it. More in his body. He had coffee in the kitchen in the morning, and he stood at the counter and actually drank it instead of taking it into the study. And when she came in, he looked up from the counter and said, "Good morning," like he meant it. She said, "Good morning" back. They had breakfast together. She made eggs because the alternative was waiting for someone to make them, and she'd never been good at waiting for things she could do herself. He watched her cook with an expression she didn't try to interpret. They did not talk about Thursday. At 2 p.m, Marcus arrived. He came through the front door with the contained energy of a man who had been briefed and was running on adrenaline and trying very hard to look like he wasn't. He hugged Sienna, which surprised her. Quick, genuine, with the particular quality of an embrace from someone who is afraid and is trying to put that fear somewhere useful. "You good?" he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment with his brother's eyes in a different face. Then he nodded and went to find Adrian. At 4 o'clock, Elaine arrived, and the 3 siblings went into the study and closed the door and stayed in there for 2 hours. Sienna sat in the kitchen and read the paperback novel she'd found on the counter, which was still there, which she was increasingly certain was the kind of thing people left in the open deliberately. At 6:15, Adrian came out of the study. He was dressed for it. Dark suit, dark coat. His face had returned to the photograph of itself. Controlled, composed, stripped to function. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. She looked up from the book. 2 hours, he said. Donovan's people will be in place by 7. The operation starts at 8:30. He paused. It should be over by 9:15. Should be, she said. Yes. She put the book down, stood up, looked at him across the kitchen, the ordinary domestic distance of a kitchen, which felt obscene somehow, given what the next 3 hours were. Come back, she said. He held her gaze. That's not always... I know it's not always in your control, she said. Come back anyway. He crossed the kitchen. He stood in front of her and he put one hand on the side of her face, thumb along her jaw, and looked at her for a long moment with that uncovered expression she'd only ever seen on the gun range, that specific openness that had no performance in it. I should have walked back out of that diner, he said quietly. Yes, she said. I'm not sorry I didn't. No, she said. Neither am I. He kissed her temple. The gesture was so quiet and so deliberate that it hurt worse than something loud would have. Then he stepped back, adjusted his coat, and became Adrian Blackwell again, the man who had been feared across the criminal underworld, the man who ran on careful calculations and managed every room he entered. He walked out of the kitchen. She heard the front door. She stood at the kitchen counter with both hands flat on its surface and breathed, slow, even. The way she'd been breathing behind the counter at 2 a.m. her whole life, making it through the hour because the next hour was all you could do. The clock on the microwave read 6:22, 2 hours and 8 minutes. She picked up the book, sat down, opened to the page, read the same sentence 4 times without absorbing it. At 8:47, her phone rang. Unknown number. She picked up on the second ring. Miss Hart. The voice was a woman's, controlled, professional, with the specific flatness of someone trained to deliver information without coloring it. This is Detective Claire Donovan. Sienna's hand tightened on the phone. Operation is in progress, Donovan said. I'm calling because there's been a development you need to be aware of immediately. The kitchen was very quiet. Tell me, Sienna said. We had a security breach on our end approximately 40 minutes ago. Someone tipped Voss's people that the operation was federal. They adjusted their positioning at the venue. A pause that lasted exactly 1 second. Adrian walked into a different configuration than we anticipated. The floor felt different under her feet, like the building had shifted a degree. "Is he alive?" she said. "As of 12 minutes ago, yes." Donovan's voice stayed level. "But the situation inside the venue is not resolved. We have agents on site, but there are complications with the approach due to the building layout and the adjusted positions." Another pause. "I'm telling you this because Adrian gave me your number as his secondary contact. He asked me to call you if the situation became complicated." "What does he need?" Sienna said. "He doesn't need anything from you. I'm telling you as a courtesy." "That's not why you're calling." A silence. "No," Donovan said. "It isn't." "Then tell me why you're actually calling." The clock on the microwave read 8:49. "We have a problem," Donovan said, "and the problem has a name." Sienna stood in the kitchen of the brownstone with both hands tight around her phone and the specific, terrible clarity of a woman who had already made the hardest decision once and was about to discover she had to make it. "Gareth," Donovan said. The name landed in the kitchen like something thrown hard against a wall. Sienna stood very still. The microwave clock read 8:51. Outside the brownstone window, the street was ordinary and quiet and had no idea what was happening 2 miles away in a building she'd never seen. "He's inside the venue," Donovan continued. "He went in 40 minutes before Adrian. We didn't flag him on approach because he's been on our periphery as a potential cooperative asset. We thought he was ours." A pause that contained something that in a less controlled voice would have been anger. "He's not ours. He's Voss's," Sienna said. "He's been Voss's for at least 2 years, possibly longer." Donovan's voice stayed level, but something underneath it had gone tight. "He's the breach. He tipped Voss's people, he adjusted the configuration, and he walked Adrian into a room where the exits are covered and the people waiting are not there to negotiate." "How many people does Adrian have with him?" "2. His standard security." "Against how many on Voss's side?" "We believe 7, possibly 8 with Gareth." Sienna set her phone down on the counter without ending the call. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds, with both palms flat on the counter surface, and looked at the middle distance and ran the numbers the way she'd been running numbers her entire adult life. Not with spreadsheets, not with strategy, but with the bare arithmetic of survival that you learned when the margin between making rent and not making rent was the thing that organized your thinking. She picked the phone back up. "What do you need from me?" she said. "I need to know if Adrian has any other personnel in this city who respond directly to him. Not the family operation, not Elaine's people, him specifically." Sienna thought about the men in the brownstone, the shift patterns she'd memorized, the 2 who came on at 6 and were still in the house right now, downstairs, doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. "Yes," she said. "How many?" 2 here. There may be others I don't know about." "Get me whoever you can reach in the next 4 minutes, Donovan said. "My agents are 90 seconds from a forced entry, but I need bodies on the north exit of that building right now, or someone walks out of it that I cannot allow to walk out." "Text me the address." "Ms. Hart, text me the address." A pause of 2 seconds. The address came through. Sienna was already moving toward the stairs. She went down the stairs at a pace that was not quite running, but was everything before it. The 2 men on the ground floor, Reed, who was broad and quiet, and a younger man whose name she'd learned was Calvin, looked up when she came in. They were in the front room with the lights low, Reed standing near the window, Calvin at the table with a phone in his hand. She told them in 14 seconds flat what Donovan had told her. She gave them the address. She told them the north exit and the timeline and the number of people inside. Reed looked at her for 1 second. Then he looked at Calvin. Then he picked up his radio and said 4 words into it she didn't fully catch, and by the time he lowered it, his coat was already in his hand. "Stay here," he said to her. "I know," she said. They went out the front door. She stood in the empty front room and listened to the sound of their vehicle pulling away, and then she was alone in the brownstone with the microwave clock and the ticking study and the paperback novel on the kitchen counter. She did not stay there. She didn't decide to leave. It was more like the decision had already been made somewhere below the level of conscious thought, and her body was simply executing it. She went to the kitchen. She found the spare key on the hook beside the refrigerator where Adrian kept it. She found her coat. She found the address on her phone and looked at it long enough to know it and put the phone in her pocket. She went out the front door. The night was very cold. Clear, which made it colder. Her breath was visible in the air under the streetlights as she walked to the corner and raised her hand for a cab. And the specific absurdity of hailing a cab to drive to a federal operation was something she filed away for later and did not think about now. The cab took 11 minutes. She spent those 11 minutes looking out the window at the city moving past and feeling her heartbeat in her hands, and keeping her breathing even by force of will, and thinking about nothing beyond the next necessary thing. The address was a commercial building in a district that had been industrial and was in the slow process of becoming something else. Half the street was old warehouse architecture, half was new development, and the building at the address was the former, 4 stories of dark brick with iron-framed windows and a loading dock on the south face. There were 3 black SUVs parked at the building's perimeter with no markings, and she could see 2 figures in tactical gear on the east side, even from the cab window. She got out of the cab half a block away and walked. A federal agent stopped her at the perimeter, young, tense, hand up. "Ma'am, this area is—" "Claire Donovan," Sienna said. "She called me 20 minutes ago. My name is Sienna Hart. She needs to know I'm here." The agent spoke into his radio. A pause. Then Donovan's voice came back through it with 3 words, and the agent stepped aside. Donovan was 43, or looked it. A compact woman with short dark hair and the kind of face that had processed a significant number of difficult things without letting them make it permanently hard. She was standing at a mobile command position on the east side of the building, wearing a tactical vest over a dark jacket and holding a radio in one hand and a phone in the other. And when Sienna came up, she looked at her with the rapid, cataloging attention of someone who had been briefed on her but was forming their own opinion in real time. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know," Sienna said. "What's happening?" Donovan looked at her for a moment. Then she apparently decided something. "Forced entry went in 90 seconds ago," she said. "North exit is covered. Your people arrived in time. We have contact on the 2nd floor." She paused. "It's active." From inside the building came a sound that was muffled by walls and distance into something almost abstract. A series of flat, percussive reports that Sienna's body registered before her mind named them. She felt her jaw lock, felt her hands close. She kept her face still. "Adrian's position?" she said. "Unknown for the last 4 minutes." Donovan's voice was precise, and she kept her eyes on the radio. His last confirmed position was northeast corner of the 2nd floor. His security took casualties on approach. Sienna's heartbeat was very loud in her ears. She did not let it come out on her face. "Gareth," she said. "Unknown. We lost visual on him when the breach went in." The radio crackled. Donovan lifted it, listened, her face processing the information that came through without broadcasting it. Then her face changed, just slightly, a small tightening around the eyes. "What?" Sienna said. "2nd floor is cleared," Donovan said. "Voss is in custody." A pause. "They're looking for 2 more. Sienna stared at her. 2 more. Not Voss's people. 2 more that weren't accounted for in the resolved space, which meant 2 people from Adrian's side, Adrian and one other, or Adrian and one of Voss's, who'd moved, still unlocated in a building that was in the process of being swept. Sienna looked at the building, at the dark brick, at the iron-framed windows on the 2nd floor where she could see the moving shadows of flashlight beams through the glass. She thought about a man in a machine shop in Ohio at 16, learning the weight of steel from someone who treated him with matter-of-fact respect. She thought about a paperback novel with a receipt bookmark 2/3 through. She thought about Come Back Anyway. The radio crackled again. Donovan's hand went tight around it. Then, a voice through the static, controlled but with something underneath it that was the specific vocal quality of physical effort of a person transmitting while using the rest of their body for something else. "North stairwell, 3rd floor. I need a medic on the north stairwell." She knew his voice. Even through static, even compressed by radio transmission, she knew it the way you knew things that had gotten into you through repetition and proximity and the particular attention you paid to things that mattered. He was alive. She breathed. One full breath, in and out, that she'd been holding for the better part of 20 minutes. They brought him out through the north exit 11 minutes later. He was walking. That was the first thing. He came out of the building on his own feet with one of Donovan's agents on his left side and Reed on his right, and he was moving with a controlled deliberateness that she recognized as the walk of a person in pain who had decided pain was not relevant to the current situation. There was blood on the left side of his face. Not a lot. A cut above the cheekbone, the kind that bled because cuts on the face always bled more than they were worth, not because anything serious had happened there. His coat was torn at the shoulder. His hands were... She looked at his hands because that was where she always looked, and his hands were cut across the knuckles of the right and had someone else's blood on the left. He saw her when he was 15 feet away. He stopped walking. The agent on his left said something to him. He held up a hand, the right, the cut one, without looking away from her, and the agent stopped talking. They looked at each other across 15 feet of cold pavement, with federal agents moving around them, and the building still lit with flashlight beams behind him, and the clear night sky pressing down on all of it. She walked to him. She didn't run. She walked, because running would have made it something it wasn't, and what it was simple, and did not need dramatic gesture. She walked to him, and when she was close enough, she reached up and put her hand on the side of his face that wasn't cut, the way he'd put his hand on hers in the kitchen, and looked at him. His jaw was tight. His eyes were on her face with that uncovered quality, the expression that had no performance in it, that she'd only seen a handful of times, and each time it had cost him something. "You're here," he said. "Yes." "I told you to." "I know what you told me," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. His breath came out in the cold air in a visible cloud, uneven at the edges, which told her more about the last 40 minutes than anything else. Then he closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something in them had shifted. Some last-held tension released, like a line that had been pulled taut for a very long time, finally allowed to go slack. He put his forehead down against hers. She stood there and held his face in her hands and felt him breathe. Gareth was found in the building's basement 22 minutes after Adrian came out. He was alive. He had a broken collarbone and a split lip, and the specific look of a man who had been on the wrong side of someone considerably larger and more motivated than himself, which told Sienna something about what had happened in the north stairwell without anyone having to explain it. He was taken into federal custody. He did not look at Adrian when they brought him out. Adrian watched him go with a face that contained something Sienna couldn't name and didn't try to, something that lived in the space between grief and fury and had not yet settled into either. Voss was already in a federal vehicle. She didn't see him. She was glad not to see him. Donovan found her near the perimeter while Adrian was being looked at by a medic. She came up beside her and stood there for a moment looking at the building. 6 of the 7 warrants executed simultaneously, she said. The 7th individual was not at his registered address. We'll have him by morning. Sienna nodded. The Blackwell family's exposure in this investigation is significant, Donovan said. I want to be honest with you about that. I know. The cooperation Adrian provided over the last 8 months will be considered during prosecution. It won't make everything go away. She paused. But the primary target of this investigation was always Voss. The case was built around Voss's operation. The Blackwell family's entanglement exists largely because Voss manufactured it, used them as a screen, and fed us information selectively to make them appear to be the primary. She looked at Sienna. Adrian figured that out 6 months ago. That's why he came to us. Sienna turned to look at her. He didn't come to you to cut a deal, she said slowly. He came to us to give us Voss, Donovan said. The terms for his family were secondary. He genuinely... She stopped. Something moved across her controlled face that was almost reluctant admission. He genuinely wanted the operation, not the protection. Sienna looked across the perimeter to where Adrian was sitting on the running board of one of the SUVs with a medic closing the cut on his cheekbone. His face was turned slightly away. She could see the line of his jaw in the cold light, the particular set of his shoulders that she'd spent weeks learning to read. She thought about a man who had been carrying things alone until they wore through. She thought about what it cost to choose to stop. Thank you, she said to Donovan. Donovan looked at her. For what? For calling me. A pause. I called because he asked me to. I know, Sienna said. Thank you anyway. Well, They didn't go back to the brownstone that night. Adrian had a property outside the city, not the estate, something smaller. A house on a lake that was not in any family name and that Sienna had not known about until he told her about it in the back of Reed's vehicle on the drive out. He told her about it in the same flat, direct way he told her most things, without preamble, like it was simply information she should have. "I bought it 4 years ago," he said, "when I started thinking about what after might look like." "After," she said, "after all of this." He was looking out the window. The cut on his cheekbone had been closed with 2 small strips of medical tape. The medic had wanted him in a hospital for a scan, and he had declined with the specific, immovable politeness of a man who was not going to a hospital. "I used to drive out there when I needed to think. I haven't been there in 7 months. Why not?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because thinking had stopped helping," he said. "Everything I thought about was already in motion and couldn't be changed. Thinking about it was just wait." She looked at him in the passing dark, at the cut and the torn coat and the hands that were clean now, wiped down by the medic, but that she knew the history of. "What did you think about," she said, "when you were there?" He turned from the window, looked at her in the dark vehicle. "Different things," he said. "In the beginning. Toward the end, mostly just what it would feel like to be done. Done with the life. Done with the version of myself that the life required." He held her gaze. "I didn't know what I'd be without it. I'm not sure I still do." She held his gaze back. "You'd be the person who spent a summer in a machine shop in Ohio," she said. "The one who reads the same book until the spine breaks." Something moved across his face. "That person is still there," she said. "I've been talking to him for weeks." He looked at her for a long moment in the moving dark of the vehicle. Outside, the city had given way to highway, to the flat open darkness of the winter landscape, to the particular quiet of being past the edge of things. He reached out and took her hand, not the way he'd held it before, not the surprised stillness of the first time, or the deliberate grip outside the restaurant. This was different. This was the way you held something you'd almost lost and hadn't. She let him. The house on the lake was small and cold and smelled like a place that had been closed up for months. That particular combination of old wood and dust and the ghost of a fire that had been burned a long time ago. Adrian moved through it with the familiarity of someone returning to a place he'd thought about more than he'd been. Turning on lamps, checking the heating unit, opening the flue of the fireplace with the ease of muscle memory. Sienna stood in the main room and looked at it. It was not what she'd expected. The estate had been designed, everything in it chosen and arranged. The brownstone was functional and contained and professional. This was different. This room had the character of genuine habitation, a worn rug in front of the fireplace, bookshelves that were overfull and inexpertly organized, a kitchen table with 4 mismatched chairs, a window that looked out over the lake that was visible in the darkness as a different quality of black than the land around it. There were marks on the doorframe between the kitchen and the main room. Height marks, she realized, the kind families made for children, in pencil, with dates beside them. "This was your father's," she said. Adrian turned from the fireplace, looked at the doorframe. Something crossed his face that was quiet and complicated. "His father's, originally," he said. "Then his. It came to me when he died." He looked at the height marks. "My grandfather built it, before any of the rest of it." Sienna looked at the marks, at the oldest ones, highest up, from decades ago, at the later ones, lower, that were the measurements of children, Adrian and Elaine and Marcus, she assumed, marked in years. "How old were you when you stopped coming here?" she said. 16. He was still looking at the doorframe. "The summer I was at the machine shop. When I came back, my father had decided I was old enough to be brought into the business fully." He paused. "We didn't come back to the lake after that." She looked at him across the room, across the worn rug and the cold fireplace and the years that had accumulated in this space without anyone to hold them. "Adrian," she said. He looked at her. "Come here." He came across the room. She reached up and took his face in her hands again. Not the way she'd done it outside the building, that desperate check for life and presence, but slowly, deliberately, the way you held something you'd decided to hold. He looked at her with that uncovered expression. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right, The night at the diner. He stopped, started again. His voice was careful, and she could hear the effort of the care. I told you I chose you because you don't perform calm. Because you have it. He paused. That was true. It wasn't the whole truth. She waited. I'd been watching the diner for 2 weeks, he said. Not you specifically. The route was something I used when I was moving between locations and needed something unremarkable. I stopped once for the coffee before the machine broke. The suggestion of something that was not quite a smile. I'd seen you work. I'd watched how you handled the room, how you handled the people in it who were difficult. He looked at her steadily. I wasn't choosing someone functional. I was looking for a reason to talk to a woman I'd noticed because she was the most real person I'd seen in a very long time. And I dressed it up in operational language because I didn't know how to do the other thing. The fireplace was cold behind him. The lake was dark through the window. The room held the specific quiet of a house that had been waiting for the people who belonged in it. Sienna looked at him for a long moment. You paid me $50,000, she said. Yes. Because you didn't know how to say hello. Essentially, she laughed. It came out of her without decision, real and sudden and unexpected enough that she felt her whole chest open with it. He watched her laugh with an expression that was so completely undone that she almost stopped, except the laugh had its own momentum, and she let it finish itself. When it did, she was still holding his face, and he was looking at her with that expression, and the room was warm now from the heating unit, and she could hear the quiet of the lake through the window. You're an idiot, she said. Yes, he said, an extremely well-dressed idiot. Yes. She kissed him. Not with urgency. The urgency was spent, had been spent outside the building in the cold, and in the car, and in all the weeks before that. This was something else, something that had its own weight, and took its own time and did not apologize for either. When she pulled back, he had his eyes closed. She let him have that moment. Chop. They built a fire. He found wood stacked on the back porch that was drier than it had any right to be after months of neglect, and he built the fire with the same matter-of-fact competence with which he did most physical things, without performance, without narration, just the task done well. She found blankets in a cedar chest and food in the pantry that was canned and imperfect and completely adequate. They ate at the kitchen table. They did not talk about Voss, about the indictments, about the 6 warrants that had been executed that night, or the 7th that was coming in the morning. They did not talk about what happened next for the Blackwell family operation, or what the federal cooperation meant for the months ahead, or what the name Gareth now meant in the architecture of their understanding of the past 2 years. All of that existed. It was real, and it was waiting. But it was waiting outside, in the cold, and for tonight the door was closed against it. She told him about Danny, more than she'd told him at the restaurant. The fuller version, the one that included the years after their parents were gone and the particular texture of 2 people learning to take care of each other through a phone line across several hundred miles. He listened without filling the silences, which she'd come to understand was one of his best qualities and one of the least visible. He told her about his father, not the business, the man, the height marks on the doorframe, the way the man had smelled like motor oil and good coffee in the evenings when he came in from the property. The particular way he had of saying his children's names when he was proud of them, which was different from the way he said them when he was instructing them. The fact that the paperback novel on the kitchen counter had been given to him on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks before his father died, set on his pillow without explanation, which was its own kind of explanation. She listened. The fire in the other room was audible, the occasional pop of settling wood. The lake was quiet outside, the kind of quiet that cities never achieved, that had texture to it, that was made of small sounds rather than the absence of them. At some point in the telling, they had both moved from the kitchen table to the couch in front of the fire, and at some point after that, she was leaning against his shoulder and his arm was around her, and neither of them had quite marked the transition. What happens now? She said eventually. Not anxiously, just asking. He was quiet for a long moment. The family business changes, he said. Some of it is already gone. The 6 from tonight won't come back to it. The rest, Marcus and I have been talking for a long time about moving the holdings into legitimate operations. Property, development, the infrastructure was always sound. It was the methods around it. He paused. It'll take years. It'll cost money in ways that aren't recoverable. And there will be people who don't want it to change who will make that known. He shifted slightly. But it's possible. It's more possible this morning than it was yesterday. She thought about the height marks on the doorframe, the machine shop in Ohio, the paperback novel. And you? She said. He looked at her. What do you want? She said. Not the family, not the operation. You. He was quiet for a long time. The fire settled. The lake was still outside. This, he said finally, quietly, without drama. The way a man said something when he'd been carrying it for a long time and had finally found the right person to say it to. Something that actually belongs to me. Something that isn't managed or calculated. He looked at the fire. I want to sleep through a night. He paused. I want to come back to the same place and have someone know I'm coming. She held that. I'm not easy, she said. I know. I'll argue with you. I know that too. I'll argue with you about things that don't matter and be right about things that do. The closest he'd ever come to a real smile moved across his face. Not the suggested one, not its precondition. The actual thing, quiet and warm and entirely real. I know, he said. She leaned back against his shoulder. They sat with the fire and the lake and the quiet house around them. And outside, the winter night continued to be what winter nights were, cold and dark and indifferent. And inside the small house on the lake, there was warmth, and two people who had found each other by accident and stayed by decision, and the fire that would need to be fed again in a few hours, and all of it simple and impermanent and entirely, completely enough. 6 months later, Sienna Hart sat at the kitchen table of the house on the lake on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and the newspaper and the particular contentment of a person who has arrived somewhere they did not plan to go and found it was exactly right. The table had gained a fifth chair. She didn't remember when. One of Marcus's visits, most likely. He came out every few weeks with the energy of a man who had been given permission to be lighter than he'd ever been and was not wasting the opportunity. Outside the window, the lake was summer green and the morning was warm and clear. She heard him before she saw him. Footsteps from the back hallway, unhurried, the coffee grinder running for exactly 40 seconds, which she'd clocked enough times now to know it was his measure. Then he appeared in the kitchen doorway with 2 cups and set one in front of her and sat down across from her with the particular ease of someone who had learned to inhabit a space. He looked different. He'd looked different for months now, the change happening so gradually that you only saw it clearly in retrospect, or in moments like this one, when she caught him before he'd fully assembled the day's expression, and what she saw was simply a man in a kitchen on a Saturday morning, tired in the ordinary way of someone who'd slept rather than the structural way of someone who couldn't. He picked up the other section of the newspaper. She drank her coffee. The lake was very still outside. Danny called, she said. I know, I talked to him. She looked up. You talked to him. He called while you were in the shower. We talked for 20 minutes about the podcast. He did not look up from the paper. He's coming up in August. She looked at him across the table, at the face she'd learned like a language, the grammar of it, the idioms, the particular way it said the things it wasn't saying. You called my brother, she said. He called me, Adrian said, turning a page. Adrian. He looked up. She looked at him across the kitchen table in the morning light of the house on the lake. Outside the window, the water was green and still, and the day was already warm and going to be warmer, and there was nothing pressing, no calculation, no weight of managed consequence hanging over the next several hours. Thank you, she said. He looked at her with the uncovered expression, the real one. You're welcome, he said. She looked back at her coffee. He looked back at his newspaper. The coffee grinder was quiet. The lake was still. The morning moved over them the way good mornings moved, without urgency, without announcement, as if it had always been here and expected to stay. Later, when people asked, Sienna would pause before answering, not from hesitation, from the pleasure of finding the right words, because the story deserved them. It started as a business arrangement, she'd say, and Adrian, wherever he was when she said it, would find her eyes across whatever room they were in and let the real smile come. Quiet and warm, and entirely without performance. Because the last woman Adrian Blackwell had trusted had done the one thing no one in his life had ever managed. She had stayed. Not because she had to, not because it was safe, but because some things, Once you've found them in the cold and the dark, you do not put down. You carry them home, and you keep them there.